Hey guys, it's me, and welcome to the series What If? What if someone threw you into a den of hungry lions? Well, that's exactly what happened to a man named Daniel, and he lived to tell the tale. Here's how. Daniel was a man who remained faithful to God, even when the king of the Babylonian Empire made a royal decree that forbade people from praying to anyone but the king. You see, this king had conquered many lands and taken many people captive, including Daniel, who was one of the captives. But even though Daniel was far from his home and his family, and even though he faced the constant temptation of delicious Babylonian food, which most likely would have been the fattest, juiciest meat, because they were a wealthy empire, he remained faithful to God and didn't eat the food or bow down to any of the gods of Babylon. In fact, he prayed 3 times a day, just like clockwork, with his windows open towards Jerusalem, the city where the temple stood and God's presence was believed to be the thickest. But after a while, his enemies, who were probably jealous that God protected Daniel and blessed him for his faithfulness, went to the king and accused him of plotting rebellion against the empire because he refused to stop praying to his God. So the king, who probably didn't want to deal with a rebellion, got angry and gave an order that no one was to pray to any god or man for 30 days except the king. And whoever broke this law was to be thrown into a den of lions. And guess who was thrown into a den of lions? That's right, Daniel. And how do we know that the lions were hungry? Because the king ordered that their food be taken away, so that they would be extra hungry by the time Daniel was thrown into the den. And then the king came to Daniel's house, and seeing that Daniel was still praying, gave the order to throw him into the lion's den. Now, there are 2 things that I find interesting about this story. Number 1, Daniel wasn't just thrown into some random animal's den. He was specifically thrown into a den of lions. Now, lions were the king of the jungle, just like the king of Babylon was the king of the empire. They were both at the top of their food chain. And yet Daniel wasn't afraid. Why? Well, because he knew that God was in control, not the lions or the king of Babylon. In fact, Daniel had a stronger king, a much fiercer God, who had already delivered him from a fiery furnace. And I think that gave him confidence that God would deliver him from this den of lions, too. Number 2, the king didn't actually want to kill Daniel. He hesitated. The story says that when the king heard that Daniel would rather die than stop praying to his God, he said, "Is your God, whom you are so zealous about, able to save you from the lion's den?" And then Daniel replied, "He will." And the king was so upset that Daniel didn't fear death that he did everything he could to save face. He went back on his word and told Daniel that he could continue praying, but then he had to make it seem like he was the one who saved Daniel from the lion's den. See, kings don't like to be defied, especially in front of all those courtiers who heard Daniel's reply. So instead of saying, "You're right, Daniel, I shouldn't have made that law," he said, "Thanks to my mighty power, no harm will come to you." Then he gave orders for Daniel to be thrown into the den of lions, but only after sunset, presumably to make it harder for God to protect him. So as night fell, the king gave the order, and Daniel was thrown into the den with the lions. But you won't believe what happened next. The story says that God shut the mouths of the lions so that they wouldn't hurt Daniel at all. And in the morning, the king came to the den to see if Daniel had been torn to pieces. And when he saw that Daniel was unharmed, he shouted for someone to bring him out. And when Daniel came out of the den, the king said, "Your God, who is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent his angel and has shut the mouths of the lions. You have been heard in your prayer and delivered blameless." And then Daniel and everyone who heard this proclaimed the greatness of God, and the king honored Daniel's God. And do you know what happened to those who tried to get Daniel killed? The Bible says that the king then ordered that those men be thrown into the lion's den, and they were torn to pieces in an instant. So remember, when you put your trust in God, He'll help you through whatever situation you're in, whether it's a global pandemic, financial trouble, relationship issues, academic pressure, or whatever. Just keep trusting God like Daniel did, and He'll help you.